Welcome, everyone, to episode 19 of the Castle of Spirits podcast. Brought to you by castleofspirits.com, where you can read 4,600 and counting true paranormal stories submitted by readers and listeners just like yourself.
That's right, and they're all free.
Yes.
You'll never go penetrate a paywall to read the stories at castleofspirits.com.
No.
That's
never.
our solemn promise.
Mm-hmm.
And on tonight's topic, one of my favorite topics, by the way,
What is
of
it?
paranormalia, the phenomenon of the vanishing hitchhikers.
Oh, I don't want to talk about that.
Well, it's too late. You're locked in.
Well, it's too scary.
You hit the record button.
I'm going to be afraid.
It's okay. It's all in the mind.
It's all in the mind.
Right.
But I thought it was ghosts.
Right. I don't think a vanishing hitchhiker can necessarily hurt you. But can they?
I don't know any stories of vanishing hitchhikers harming anyone, so I'm going to take that as a good sign.
So, Jane, when I say vanishing hitchhiker, what's the first thing that pops to mind?
Well, clearly, Resurrection Mary.
Isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Resurrection Mary.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's because of a very terrifying and classic episode of Unsolved Mysteries.
Yes.
I think it was from the early to mid 90s.
It had to have been the mid 90s, yeah.
Robert Stack was still around,
Mm-hmm.
seemingly held up by some sort. I think the coat that he wore, the trench coat he wore, was
Rebar up his back.
it was reinforced somehow, and they were able to to keep him going. And thankfully, because without him, where would Unsolved Mysteries be?
For reals. I mean, I know they tried to keep it going after Robert Stack died, but it just wasn't the same thing. Robert Stack, there was something about, his creepy voice was excellent, but also he had this creepy little subdued smirk. He always looked like he was thinking, this is going to scare the hell out of you, and I'm here for it. You know?
Yeah, either that or this is a bunch of hogwash.
No.
And I'm here for the check.
No.
I wouldn't blame him.
No, he looked like he had something up his sleeve.
Well, there was a lot of room in those sleeves.
Those were some big trench coat sleeves, that's true.
Well, he did leave a big trench coat to fill.
Wow. So, yeah, the episode, Resurrection Mary, I can tell you exactly what episode it was. It was season 6, episode 15 from 1994. And I really love that episode because the story of Resurrection Mary, I think, is super creepy anyway, right? And we'll get into exactly what that story is if you're not familiar with Resurrection Mary. But the thing that really creeps me out so much about that episode is when the couple who's telling the story of when they saw her, as they're driving past her, the camera pans back, it turns as it goes past her, and she's kind of glowy and she's in this white gown and she's got this long blonde hair and it's very blurred out. She looks very ghostly, but then everything from her face to her neck is just black. It's just this pure black hole surrounded by this, ethereal white glow. It's terrifying. I remember that scaring the hell out of me when I was in high school.
Well, and now we need to tell people exactly who and what Resurrection Mary is
Please
/ was.
Do.
In case you don't know, Resurrection Mary is a really well-known urban legend from the Chicago area. Right? It's one of the vanishing hitchhiker stories. Basically, urban legend of the vanishing hitchhiker is a person or persons driving on a lonely road late at night, come across, usually it's a female. And
sometimes openly hitchhiking, sometimes just kind of standing there, or even darting into the road.
Right. And when this person is picked up and taken to their destination, they disappear, basically. There's a few different variations on the classic urban legend, not necessarily on Mary herself, and Wikipedia actually has a really good breakdown of all of these different tropes for the vanishing hitchhiker scenario. And so there's a link to it in the show notes, or you can just go to Wikipedia and search vanishing hitchhiker. But
there's a couple different tropes in the stories. First, you've got the person who is picked up on the side of the road, says, take me to this address, but they disappear before you get to that address. And then when the person stops at that address and says, hey, what happened to this person? They find out, oh, that person died in a car crash, typically years before. There's another one where the person who's picked up, and it's almost always a woman, whether she's hitchhiking or, as in the Resurrection Mary story, he's dancing with her at a dance hall. But later, he goes to take her home, and she's borrowed a jacket from him, because it's cold out. So he gives her his jacket. She says, oh, I want to stop at this cemetery. Let's go look. She runs off. She disappears. He later comes across a tombstone with that woman's name on it and his jacket lying across it. So that's another one of the tropes.
And although we talk about Resurrection Mary being featured prominently on a 1990s era Unsolved Mysteries, this is something that goes back a long ways.
Mm-hmm.
I was very surprised to find that the first reference to this vanishing hitchhiker legend occurred in 1602.
Oh, that's a few years before the 1980s. Wow.
True. I do think that Robert Stack was alive.
I'm sure he narrated that episode shortly after it occurred as well. Yes.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Basically, this is something that happened in Sweden.
Mm-hmm.
In February 1602, there was a priest and a couple of farmers, and they were making their way home.
Mm.
And there was a maid that they met along the way. She asked them if she could come along. So they stopped to eat at an inn. She asked for something to drink, and they said, yeah, sure, of course, we'll buy you a drink. She wanted a beer.
As all good maidens do.
Correct. Then something strange happened. When the innkeeper brought the beer, they discovered that the jug was filled with malt. They took it back, tried it again. This time it was filled with acorns. And then, just like a good joke, the third time's a charm. Comes back, it's full of blood.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody's horrified.
I mean, acorns are scary.
Yes, but it can be portents for the future. At this point, the maid declares the receipt of the grain means that this year there's going to be a great yield.
Mm.
The acorns indicate that the trees are going to be filled with fruit this year.
Mm.
But the blood indicates there will be pestilence and war.
Was there a war?
And there's always a war.
Oh.
See, that's the thing, is that's a really safe sort of prediction that you can make. And then, of course, in this legend, she vanishes into thin air, freaks everybody out. They probably left and said, we're going to have a meal someplace else where they serve
us beer when we order it.
Yeah.
So that's interesting, though, the 1600s.
So that sort of Genesis story has all of the elements of the vanishing hitchhiker legend as it would come to evolve over the centuries. So fast forward to the 1940s. And that's when the very first proper study of this legend was undertaken by these folklorists. Basically what they did was they took a lot of accounts of these occurrences and started drilling them down. What are the things that are similar? What are the things that all of them have in common?
Mm-hmm.
And they boiled them down to basically 4 types.
Right. And I already mentioned the going to the address given and only to find out that person died, and then having loaned an article of clothing to the quote-unquote ghost, and then later finding it on the tombstone.
Right. Another one was where the hitchhiker is not a young lady, but an old woman.
Ooh.
And she has prophecies of disaster. And at that specific time, there were a lot of stories about an old woman giving prophecies about how World War II would end.
Oh, that's interesting. Very specific.
Right. Well, that was the biggest thing happening in the world at the time.
Yeah.
And the other type was stories where the vanishing hitchhiker was identified as a local divinity.
Meaning what?
Meaning a figure of religious importance in that community or in that country or in that city. You have, for example, in 1941, there was an incident in Kingston, New York. The vanishing hitchhiker, they identified her later as Mother Cabrini, who was a Sacred Heart Orphanage founder. So she was a very important and a revered person of faith in her society, in her city.
I feel like in the U.S., at least in this modern era, those are probably a little less frequently reported type sightings. I feel like the ones that we hear about the most are kind of the, I met this girl at the dance. I went to take her home, but she disappeared. I knocked on the door of the address she gave me only to find out she died. And then the, article of clothing left on the tombstone. But I think that there's interesting twists that have evolved over the years to these type of stories. So, it's almost like these stories kind of got played out, and then we thought, well, let's see how we can keep it going, but kind of switch it around. And one of the versions of the story that I've heard is kind of like, it's a reverse. So it's not the guy picking up a hitchhiker who turns out to be a ghost. It's a hitchhiker getting picked up by someone who turns out the driver, and their vehicle turns out to be a ghost.
A ghost car.
Yeah.
Or a ghost Samaritan. And that would make sense, too, what you said about how the story is kind of ramped up as the years go on, as things progress. Because from my understanding, that's how folklore works. For example, in the UFO community, a lot of people believe that what people are experiencing nowadays, seeing UFOs, seeing grays in their bedrooms at night, getting abducted by aliens, is just a natural evolution through time of something that once started out as perhaps elves or woodland fairies, things like that, that people nowadays don't believe in.
Right.
Yet people nowadays do have a tendency to believe more in the possibility of aliens. And so therefore you can see that also happening with The Vanishing Hitchhiker.
Yeah.
In that, I don't know if very many people pick up hitchhikers anymore.
I mean,
and it's more than
I
likely,
see people hitchhiking. Somebody's got to be picking these people up.
Well, it's more than maybe these
Not
people.
me.
Maybe these people that you saw were not really there. But don't pick them up.
I mean, I can't guarantee anyone around me saw them. That's a good point. But I've heard stories over the years of, the similar thing, like, oh, this guy was picked up, and then it turned out that the person was a ghost or whatever. And I tried to find some stories like that today, but I couldn't find any reputable stories online about, such occurrences. But the one thing that really springs to mind, and it was actually mentioned in that article, was the scene in Pee-wee's Big Adventure with Large Marge. And
oh, okay. Wait, I've only seen Pee-wee's Big Adventure, I think, once.
Oh, for shame. We need to watch it again. But I remember that scene, it scared me so bad when I was a kid, and I loved it.
Okay, so who is Large Marge? We know who Pee-wee is. Who is Large Marge?
Okay, so in the movie Pee-wee's Big Adventure, he's hitchhiking, and it's dark, it's foggy, there's no music. It's really creepy the way the semi is slowly approaching and everything. It's a terrifying scene. When I was a kid, I lived for that scene of the movie. I would have taken the entire movie being that. So it stops. He gets into the truck, and there's this woman driving it, and she's just like this rough looking trucker woman, and he tells her thanks for the ride, whatever. And she starts telling him this story, just like all of the urban legends. It was a night just like this. And she starts describing this horrible wreck, and talking about when they pulled the driver out, he looked just like this, and her face explodes into this horrible monster thing, and it's terrifying and whatever. And so he stops. He says, "Oh, this is fine right here." So she stops, and it's at some diner, and before he gets out, she tells him, "Tell him Large Marge sent ya," and laughs. And so, of course, he goes into the diner. "Large Marge sent me." Everybody like gasps. And a guy in the restaurant goes on to tell basically the exact same story. "It was a night just like this." And turns out it was Large Marge's ghost. She was the truck driver in the horrible accident 10 years ago that very evening. And so I've heard stories similar over the years, whether it's just like a local legend or just a variation on a theme. I think that that's kind of the flip side to the vanishing hitchhiker is the driver who is the ghost.
Yeah, and maybe the fact that there's not a lot that you can find on it is because it is something that is a little bit newer, hasn't been around for 400 years.
Yeah, it's probably a little bit harder to confuse. And I'm not saying that everybody who has a vanishing hitchhiker story is making it up or confused. I'm not saying that at all, because I happen to love me a vanishing hitchhiker story, and I believe there's a grain of truth in there somewhere. But I think that it's probably a little bit harder to confuse a ride from point A to point B as being by a ghost driver. You know what I mean? Like,
well, what I'm noticing is that there are a lot of these stories about the phantom ride giver, the phantom picker-upper, are that they're very anecdotal. And I know for a fact that I can't remember specifics, but I know for a fact I've heard several of these stories in things like episodes of Snap Judgment, Spooked, or Radio Rental. I know there was a story I heard pretty recently of a lady who was a truck driver in the 70s, and she was one of the very few at the time doing it in an all-male
industry,
in a male-dominated thing. And she told a story about this truck that she kept encountering that essentially warned her of a wreck that was ahead of her on an icy road. So there are these stories, but I think maybe there's just haven't been any thorough research performed on them like they did, as I mentioned before.
Another way that I feel like the story has kind of evolved over the years is the idea of not the people on the side of the road being ghosts again, but, the story of like the couple who their car breaks down or whatever, and they're walking down the side of the road. They spot a house. They go there. There's a sweet elderly couple who gives them tea and cookies and lets them spend the night and lets them use their phone. And the next morning, they're so grateful. So they leave an envelope of money on a little table next to the door, and they leave early in the morning before anybody else is up to go back to their car. And then later, they tell people in town, "Oh, these people helped us." And those people say, "No, those people are dead. They died, their house burned down," or whatever. There's different variations. They go back to say thank you and to verify that these people existed. And what they find is a burned out shell of a house. But always there's some evidence that they were there, whether it's the little table where they left the money and the money is there untouched. There was one that I read about coins. They left some coins sitting on the little table. And so there's always, it's just like with the car, the hitchhiker, how the hitchhiker may leave a purse or a jacket in the back seat of the car when she disappears, or she leaves a jacket that she borrowed draped over her tombstone. There's some evidence that this actually happened.
And I think that is probably a completely different phenomenon, even though it's easy to kind of jumble them together. More so specifically because of what some people say is at the root of what people experience when they have these, what they're calling are highway hallucinations, when they see people on the side of the road darting out in front of the car. Of course, that having a hallucination about something running out in the middle of the road is completely different than having a conversation with somebody and giving them a lift and going to their house. So you're left to wonder exactly what is going on. Are these urban legends embellishments of people who have had experiences, where they see something that looks like a person on the side of the road,
Yeah.
and it freaks them out.
And maybe not even an intentional embellishment, but, a misinterpretation of what they saw or experienced.
And these are things that are not just limited to, for example, Chicago and Resurrection Mary. You've got the A229 road, and there's a ghost there. I think she's called the Bluebell Hill Ghost.
Yeah, that one, I actually thought that one was really, really creepy. They attribute, I guess there's been a lot of deaths on that road. And did you know, Vince, that road, the A229, whatever it was built on the site of an ancient Roman road. Did you know that?
No, I didn't know that.
Yeah, so it's got, this road has some serious history there. And I think that, everything in England is older than it is here. So, of course, we think that definitely means that it's haunted. If it's got a lot more history, and if Romans were involved, it's definitely haunted. And if the Druids were involved, forget it. It's absolutely haunted and cursed. But the A22 road was built on the site of an ancient Roman road, and there were a bunch of different deaths on this road, but I think the main one that they attribute the woman in white to, because it's always a woman in white, right? It was a wreck that occurred in the 1960s, 1965, I believe. A woman who was getting married the next day was with some of her friends for what they call in England a hen party, what we call a bachelorette party. And there was a wreck, and the woman and her two friends died. And people see this woman in white now, or she'll run out in front of the road and they'll hit her, actually hit her. And there's several stories of the driver going to the police to say, I hit a person. I hit this person. One guy said that he wrapped her in a blanket. He thought it was like a 10-year-old child. He wrapped her in a blanket and went to the police, and they came back, and there was no indication that there was ever a wreck. There was no damage to the car. There was no child. There was nothing, no blood, no nothing. And that has been reported several times on that piece of road.
Well, that reminds me, there's another one called the Belchen Tunnel in Switzerland. That was on the A2 motorway. So a lot of A2s in here.
They like A's and 2s in Europe.
Yeah, kind of strange, the numberings. We don't get it over here in America, where we have Route 66 and Highway 101 and things like that. But there's a legend of the white woman.
Or the Weissefrau.
The what?
Weissefrau.
And what is that?
White woman.
Oh, okay. That's in Switzerland. So in the early 80s, this is all I know, the early 80s, there was some sort of white woman on this A2 motorway that appears out of nowhere, and people have encounters with this mysterious person. What's interesting about it was that I heard that the first reports were telling of a male hitchhiker.
Yeah, I saw that too, which was really weird because you next to never see these stories being about a male hitchhiker. It's almost always a female hitchhiker, whether she's young and beautiful or like an old crone type woman, but it's always a female, and the person picking them up is almost always a male.
What does that say about it? Does it say that men are a little bit more likely to pick up ghosts based on their appearance, and that women might be a little bit more discriminating about who they pick up on the side of the road?
Well, let me ask you a question. You're a man driving down the street and you see a female hitchhiker. Do you think you're more likely to pick her up than a woman driving down the street seeing a male hitchhiker?
It depends. What am I doing? If I'm going to get a pizza,
ain't nobody getting in the car.
Nobody's getting in the car with me and my pizza. I'm taking that sucker home. Now, if I have a day off and, the cat's away.
Well, I think it's the dichotomy of, a young woman in white. That's kind of the picture of innocence and safety and somebody needing protection. And the male protector is the driver, and he's the picture of strength and maleness, right?
And do they all talk like this?
And they all talk like this is how all men speak. But when he stops and picks her up, she's not this weak creature needing protection. She's something completely different. So I think it's that dichotomy that makes the story scary, right? If it's this skulking, like hunched over creature going,
how did that go?
On the side of the road, you're not going to be like, we should stop and give him a ride. You're going to just like scream, and that's a different urban legend. And so I think that there has to be kind of that innocence, that beautiful innocence that creates the story for, let's stop and give her a ride.
And so this is a case of the female ghost visiting on the man and imparting upon him the lesson
that ghosts are feminists and we don't need your protection.
Hear, hear. Or, it could just be a stranger danger cautionary tale.
Right.
Be careful who you pick up, because they may not be who you think they are.
Or what you think they are, yeah.
Exactly. And speaking of the male hitchhiker in distress, I came across this story that I did not find on Wikipedia that I thought I'd share with us.
Oh, I can't wait to hear.
It's called The Hitchhiker of Black Horse Lake in Montana.
No, that's already a terrifying title. Black Horse Lake?
Right? So it takes place on Highway 87 in Cascade County, which is north of Great Falls, near the Black Horse Lake area.
Hence the name.
Mm-hmm. And it is known for being home to what people call the most aggressive phantom hitchhiker.
Ooh.
When you think about ghosts, you think aggressive. That's kind of creepy.
Yeah. I like a good, slow, creepy ghost, but I don't know about an aggressive one.
So here's how it goes. Usually, someone's driving down a lonely road in the middle of nowhere. When they come across a man on the side of the road, a Native American man, usually always dressed in denim. And he looks like he's hitchhiking. And whether or not the person driving stops to offer the guy a lift or just decides to drive past him, the hitchhiker suddenly jumps out in front of the car, rolls on the hood, crashes into the windshield, and flips over the top of the car, completely struck.
Yeah.
And when the person exits the car and goes to see if the man is okay, there's nobody in sight. So what have we learned? We've learned that sometimes ghosts haunt places and other times they haunt the side of the road. One thing I don't understand, though, is why somebody like Resurrection Mary would want to go back to her grave. Well,
I don't know if it's necessarily about going back to the grave so much as leading. It seems very leading, right? We're leading the person who gave us a ride to here so that they can see, so that they can know. There's a lot of those kind of themes in ghost stories. It's not so much about the ghost being found or discovering who killed them, or, it's more about the ghost wanting to be known. I want to be acknowledged. I want to be, I want you to know that I was here and to acknowledge that I was here, that I was alive, and that I am still here. And I feel like that's kind of what that is. Don't you think? I mean, how else is a ghost? All ghost sightings seem to be pretty short, right? You see a ghost, it might last for a few seconds, but they don't have a lot of time to kind of say, I was here, acknowledge me. And if you have a very small amount of time, that seems like a really good way to do it. I don't know.
Yeah, I guess that makes sense. It's if you've had one opportunity to make an impact on somebody,
right,
and ensure that the message gets across that you are here and that you exist and you're still around.
Well, because really that's all any of us are doing in life, right? We're trying to find a way to say, I exist. I'm here. You know what I mean? Like, think about just about everything that you do in life, everything that you pursue in life is about making a mark, about saying, I exist, I contributed, I made a change, I did something, I was here. And I think that when you die, that can't just go away, right? Just because your body is gone. I mean, if you're a ghost and you still have awareness, you're still here. And I think probably then more than ever, do you want to make that point known? I am here. And I think that that's a good way in the limited amount of time that a ghost would have with someone to make that point. I am here. Acknowledge me. Think about what it is that we are doing right now. We're sitting here doing this podcast. I mean, yeah, it's something that we enjoy, but you and I can sit and have these conversations on our own in privacy. But here we are recording this and putting it out to the world. It's as a way to say, we are here, we exist. These are things that we're interested in. Here's a way that we're trying to make a change to something, right? In other ways, you're a writer. That's a way for you to make a mark on humanity, to say, I am here and I did these things while I was here. I paint. That's a way for me to say, I am here and I did these things while I was here. And again, I think once you die, that need to kind of verify your existence and, mark its importance. I don't think that need or desire goes away. You just have to find different ways to do it. Damn, this episode just got deep.
Where are my boots?
But anyway, so Vince.
Yes.
Let me ask you a question.
Yes.
You're driving down the road. It's dark. You are in a fairly remote area. There's not a lot of other cars or houses around. You're alone in the car, and suddenly you see a ghostly figure on the side of the road.
Oh.
Maybe it appears to be hitchhiking. Maybe it just appears to be a damsel in distress, a damsel in glowing white, black hole for a face distress. Do you stop and offer her a ride?
I would like to say that curiosity would get the better of me, and I would pull over and give that creature a lift. But in all honesty, no way in hell. I would keep going, and I'd probably speed up. I keep looking in the backseat to make sure she didn't somehow get in. Go home, run inside, turn on all the lights in the house, lock the doors, and scream.
And scream.
And maybe cry a little bit.
You would cry a lot.
But that's me.
What
would you do?
Well, I don't think that I would stop and offer a ride because I'm a child of the 80s and I grew up during the satanic panic, stranger danger. Don't pick up hitchhikers, don't get into strange vehicles. So that's pretty deeply ingrained in me. So I don't think I would stop and offer a ride. But that said, if I drove past somebody that I was like, well, that was weird, I would definitely circle back. I would be flipping a U-turn up the street.
For another look.
I would circle back around as many times as I needed. And I wouldn't worry about being creepy either. Because if you are a glowing damsel in distress looking thing in a flowy white dress in the middle of the night, in the middle of nowhere, you gotta anticipate that people are gonna be
the
like,
looky-loos.
Right.
Yeah.
What's that? What's going on there? So yes, I would flip around and then I would drive slowly by until I couldn't stand the sight of the big black hole for the face. And then I would speed past it and then I'd get, regain myself down the street. Whew, come on. And then I'd flip around and I'd do it again until I didn't see her anymore, or until I was like, oh, sorry, ma'am. I see that you are actually a real person. My apologies. Do you need a ride somewhere? Because there's a truck coming down the street behind me and he'll probably stop and pick you up. Not me.
And it could very well be Large
Marge.
Could
be Large Marge. You don't know. Ooh, when worlds collide. What if Large Marge, or the equivalent, picked up
Resurrection Mary.
Resurrection Mary. I want to know what you guys think. What do you think would happen? How do you think that would play out if Large Marge picked up Resurrection Mary?
I don't know about that, but here's something that I do want to do someday. I want to someday go to Chicago,
Yes.
you and I,
Yes.
rent a car,
Mm-hmm.
drive out
Mm-hmm.
to Resurrection Cemetery with 150,000 people buried there. You believe that?
Yeah.
It's a huge cemetery.
Well, in the 90s, 150,000. It's got to be more than that now. But here's the thing. Let's make a plan. And maybe, and we should do it for an episode. We could like record it. That would be great. So here's what we'll do. We'll go to Chicago and we'll decompress one whole day. We will sleep all day long. And then just before dusk, we'll drive out in our rental car to that stretch of road near Resurrection Cemetery, and we will just drive back and forth all night long looking for her. And we'll record it. And if we see her, we'll make a pact right now. Vince, you shake my hand?
Yes.
If we see... Other hand, doofus. If we see her, we will stop and pick her up. Yes? You agree?
Absolutely.
He shook my hand, friends. So we're going to go to Chicago sometime soon. And hopefully we're going to pick up Resurrection Mary. Get a photo for you. At least a good story. Podcast episode, maybe.
Maybe an interview.
Maybe an interview. Resurrection Mary, what is it like to walk up and down the street in Chicago and have a big black hole for a face? These are the hard-hitting questions that we will ask of this super famous, I would dare say, the most famous single ghost in America. What do you think?
I think you'd make Barbara Walters proud.
Oh, that's nice.
And with that, I hear the strains of music
I thought I
playing
heard
in the
something
background,
back there.
informing us that it is time to wrap up this episode.
It really is.
We encourage everybody to go to castleofspirits.com and check out all the thousands and thousands of free true ghost stories.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to be back in a couple of days reading some
Yes.
ghost hitchhiker stories.
Yes.
From the
We
website?
actually have several on the website. And remember, you can absolutely join in the conversation with us. Head over to castleofspirits.com/lounge. And, tell us, have you ever seen a ghost hitchhiker, picked up one, or just know of a cool ghost hitchhiker story? Anything. We want your input. Join in the conversation, and maybe we'll read your message on a future episode. And if you have a story, like a full-on story that you would like to share with the world, castleofspirits.com/submit and tell us all about it.
And until then, keep trucking.
And tell them Large Marge sent you.